Life's a game, the world's a stage, and we are merely role players, where theatrical people play role-playing games. Welcome, everybody, to this, our very special mini-series, the Merely Role Players Replay. Today, I will be taking you on a journey into the past. Together, dear friends, we will go through the archives, we'll dig through old programmes, check our pockets for used ticket stubs, and remember fondly together the wonderful past seasons of Merely Role Players. My name is Josh, regular player, contributor to Chaos, friend of the podcast. You may recognise my voice from various seasons in the Blackshore saga, and I also play an insane old woman in the Vigil series. I'm delighted today to be joined by Merely Role Players' very own supreme storytelling savant. You know him as the voices of, among others, Lulu Bagoo, Kath and Enid, Catastrophe and or Calamity, and of course the Bovril-infused madman himself, Errol, crafter of epic tales, keeper of the cursed dice tower, lore master extraordinaire, director and producer, among other roles, of the Merely Role Players podcast. I'm of course referring to the irresistible, incandescent, and irreplaceable Matt Boothman. Hi Matt.
Hello.
How was that for an intro?
I've melted into a small puddle in my chair.
You know, when I wrote it in my head, we were doing this in front of a live studio audience to 200 people. Whereas when I'm just saying it to your face 4 feet away from me, it's a little bit weird. But welcome.
I'm making strong eye contact, as in Let's Get Gideon, which we'll talk about at some point.
It was very intense indeed. How are you today?
I'm well.
Excited to be.
I've avoided the Rona so far.
Good to hear. For those of you maybe listening in the future, we are recording in January 2022, the year of Omicron, but we're both feeling okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. How do you feel about potentially looking back over all these years of Merely Role Players history?
Looking back at early stuff always has the potential to be a bit embarrassing. You
True.
look back at things that you did before you knew better.
That's fair. Well, we'll be able to see a lot of progress that has been made throughout the years of Merely
That's a
Role
nice
Players.
way of putting it.
That's a nice way. We will use the word progress. That's great. I'm really, really looking forward to this. For those of you who didn't get an indication of what we're doing from my slightly pompous and grandiose introduction there, we're going to be looking back through the old seasons of Merely Role Players. I've got tons of questions from myself and from the cast to put to Matt, and we're just going to go through and have a good old time revisiting old memories. So, Matt, shall we begin? Let's flip the roles here. Normally you're setting the scene. Let me set the scene for you, okay? So you and I are currently sitting, let's say we're sitting in a grand library in a large manor somewhere. We're sitting in comfortable leather wingtip chairs. We have a glass of brandy in our hands, a roaring fireplace to our sides. We're just two old gentlemen chatting about old podcasting and tabletop role-playing. How does that sound?
Let me just get into character. Ooh, I'm an old man.
Oh my God, it's like I've got old man Starkey in the room with me. More on him later. Okay, let's begin. Merely Role Players is originally your brainchild. I believe it is around 4 or 5 years old now.
We put out our first episode around Halloween 2017. So that would make us, 4 and a bit.
We're old hands in terms of podcasting. Certainly, that's a long time to be podcasting for.
It is quite a while, yeah.
So
and to have been doing it consistently over that time as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of content that you put out. If you go through Spotify or you go through wherever you get your podcast and you scroll through, you'll see the number of episodes and the number of series that we put out is wonderful. Let's go right back to the beginning then. So it's in the summer of 2017, a different time, a simpler time. Where did the idea come from? You obviously have, for those of you who are listening who don't know, you've got a lot of experience in role-playing games generally. But where did the idea come to create a podcast from that?
Well, I mean, at the time, I didn't have a lot of experience in role-playing games generally. I played my first ever role-playing game session that year. That was the year that I got into Critical Role. I think that was my first real exposure to 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Mm-hmm. And just as I was getting into those episodes and starting to go, oh, this might be a thing I could get into, our mutual friend Christopher Starkey got in contact with a number of familiar Merely Role Players names and asked if we wanted to start playing in a campaign he wanted to run. So I think it was around, it must have been sort of May, June, July 2017. I made a character sheet for the very first time.
Remind us of the name of that character.
That was Silas Glenbourne.
Excellent.
Or that was a pseudonym because he was an incognito noble. So his real name was Silas Pharamond.
Marvellous name.
He was a human rogue. And yeah, so we started playing Dungeons and Dragons that year, I believe. I went on from Critical Role. I also found the Adventure Zone, started listening to that as well, which was also playing Dungeons and Dragons at the time. And probably various other things as well, which I can't quite remember the exact sequencing of. But getting into that kind of stuff, I very quickly decided I wanted to start running things or experimenting with running things. And let me try and remember the sequence of events here, because what led to Merely Role Players was a game that I ran on a holiday with a group of friends, not all of whom went on to be in Merely Role Players, but many of them did. And it was a hack of the Powered by the Apocalypse engine. And I believe my first exposure to Powered by the Apocalypse was the Adventure Zone. They have an arc near the end of their first big story balance called The Stolen Century, where they switched from Dungeons and Dragons to a Powered by the Apocalypse hack for a season. And that was my first exposure to really any role-playing game system that wasn't Dungeons and Dragons.
I think that's probably the same for most people that get into role-playing games, as they hear about the big one, right? They hear about the gateway, which is D&D, and that's all they think role-playing is about. But obviously there's a whole world of other systems out there.
Yeah, and I think because of the point at which I joined the Adventure Zone, the period from I first heard of role-playing games and I've started playing Dungeons and Dragons to I have discovered this other system and the possibilities that it holds was quite short. Like, it was a matter of months rather than sort of spending years and years and years as a D&D player. So yeah, I discovered the Powered by the Apocalypse engine through that, went looking for information about it, and found Avery Alder's Simple World, which is sort of a game and sort of a hacking Powered by the Apocalypse manual, which gives you the basics of here's how stats work, here are things that you can adopt as moves, here are ways to make your hack genre appropriate and sort of emulate the genre that you're interested in. And I knocked together a ghost story system from that, which I then pitched as an evening activity to the people that I was going on holiday with. Where were we? Because I tried to make it relevant to the place that we were staying and incorporate some local history.
Were you staying at a big National Trust property
in
the middle of nowhere?
So it was a group of friends that we often do stay at big, like restored, historic to one extent or another properties. But this one was an Airbnb, just a reasonably large one. It had a pond in the garden with an island in the middle and a boat that you could use to get to it.
Wow.
There was a Shetland pony that lived in the garden.
Fantastic.
Who we were told clearly by the landlady, do not leave the kitchen door open because she will come inside.
That sounds wonderful. Why would you not want a Shetland pony interrupting your breakfast?
There was a Shetland pony in the kitchen at one point of that holiday.
Lovely.
But yeah, I sort of sent around a message to everybody who was on that holiday, which must have been about 8 or 9 people, saying, I want to run a very simple role-playing game one evening. It'll be like a ghost story, horror kind of genre. Anybody who's interested, let me know and I'll print some sheets and we'll do this. Mm-hmm. And everybody on holiday ended up doing it. So I ended up running... I think I had run a couple of sessions of D&D before that, so it wasn't my first time GMing anything, but it was certainly my first time GMing for like 8 or 9 people.
Well, then all the stress and the focus is on you to provide entertainment for the evening. Ultimately, right? You are there to make sure that this number of people have a good time on their holiday, and you don't waste an evening, which ultimately you didn't. But what's great about the system that you created and what would eventually turn and merge into Ariadne is how simple it is. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of people don't realise about doing something like D&D. this isn't a podcast where we just shit on D&D, but D&D is a very complicated system. For a first timer to have that many stats and that many dice, it can be quite overwhelming. So to try and sell to a group of people who ultimately have gone away on holiday to relax and have a good time and drink a glass of wine in the evening with a Shetland pony, they want to relax. And so to play your system, which is, hey, roll those 2 dice, add one of 3 numbers to it, and I'll tell you the result. That's brilliant. That's like playing a board game. That's like playing an evening's parlour game.
Yeah, and we'd done murder mysteries before, so the idea of getting into a character and saying what you do was not unfamiliar to anybody there, I don't think. It was the concept of adding the randomness of dice was what was different.
Sure.
And needed to be got. And the idea of having like a single storyteller figure who is kind of arbitrating certain aspects of what's going on, I guess is different to how murder mysteries usually run.
Mm-hmm.
And like not everybody on that holiday was a theatre person, but at least some of them had theatre backgrounds, improv backgrounds. Back in university, a number of us who now do merely role players were part of an improv comedy group. So like the idea of improvising in front of people was not totally alien, I don't think.
No, it's really quite simple. If ever you're DMing or GMing to a group of drama graduates or thespian types, all you need to do is say, oh, this is your character. And suddenly we all just go starry-eyed and say, well, what's my motivation? Where am I going? It doesn't take much to spark us into life. So it must have been very comfortable for you to start with theatrical type people, which is the point of this podcast, where theatrical people play role-playing games.
Exactly.
So moving away from that then. So you played that game. It was a stunning success. Everybody had a lovely time. An idea then formulated in your head, hey, why don't we sit down at a table and record this and send it out to the good people of the internet?
Yep.
What prompted you to make that jump? What prompted you in your head to have a creative spark to say, hey, we need to get this onto the internet, rather than just playing it around the table?
I think I was at a point where I wanted to be making something. I studied creative writing because I wanted to write and like not just for myself, but put some stories out there. And at that point, I wasn't really doing anything like that sort of solo. I was having trouble writing short stories and novels, which I had been doing up until that point. I wasn't very inspired about like ideas for drama to write, that kind of stuff. And it just seemed like a more collaborative and a lower pressure way of doing something dramatic, something tangentially theatrical, and creating some stories that could be fun for people to enjoy and putting them out there. And also, and I think this is where the motivations for playing role-playing games and starting podcasts overlap. It's just an excuse to hang out with people, to say, hey, I want to spend some time with all of you. Let's make a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's play a game, or let's make a thing, and that is a reason for us to all get together and be in each other's company.
Absolutely. Well, and what a wonderful, wonderful thing that you have created from all of this. What's good about the series is that it follows this sort of narrative-focused gameplay, right? You always, from the beginning, said, tell me what you're doing and I'll tell you a dice roll appropriate. It wasn't stats-based. It wasn't like we're playing a war board game where you're looking for exactly what you want to use. You don't say, I want to roll for mind, body, soul. You say, I want to climb that ladder. I want to dispel this ghost, whatever. And you say, brilliant, roll this for me. And that really helps with pushing narrative forward, because ultimately, if we're all sitting here reading sheets of paper and rolling dice on a podcast without saying what we're doing, that is terrible, terrible content.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and any narrative first, fiction first games, I just think automatically make better audio, better actual play. And there's a lot of actual play out there. And the majority of it is still Dungeons and Dragons, and some of it is good. But I think the people who make the best podcasts playing Dungeons and Dragons are the ones that are departing the farthest from how Dungeons and Dragons is set out in the rule books to be played. Mm-hmm. Whereas in systems like Monster of the Week or anything kind of Powered by the Apocalypse based, to a greater or lesser extent Forged in the Dark systems as well, you can play them as written in the rule book and get good storytelling, like engaging audio out of them without having to kind of fight the system to get there.
Fabulous. So, you have your idea, you've run your test game with a Shetland pony, you gather your friends, you gather 4 people together, you all arrange to meet up with dice, with bits of paper and pencils, looking like a mad cult, but sitting around the kitchen table. And that is where our story begins with Season 1, Ariadne, starring Ellie, Vicky, Alex, and Strat. Ariadne, a tale of ethereal spookiness and mystery, where a well-managed theatre get-in is interrupted by the presence of a ghostly menace, and where a certain Bovril-chugging NPC came to the fore. So, 4 brand new members, enthusiastic members, friends of ours, come together to play this game. Ariadne is a story, as I say, about the very real-life Blackshaw Theatre Company doing a get-in at a fictional theatre in London, interrupted by ghostly ghastliness.
You find yourselves outside a theatre, the best-kept secret of the West End, the Ariadne. It is...
It's very well kept.
yeah. It's located in the little warren of shopping streets around Kingly Court and Carnaby Street, just off Regent Street, in a little courtyard, a stone's throw from Oxford Circus Station. You are Blackshaw Theatre, a South London theatre collective, who fewer people know are also investigators of inexplicable happenings.
Of course.
It makes sense.
Agreed?
Yes.
Oh, no,
I mean, so
absolutely.
far makes absolute
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Before we get into it, let's just sort of introduce some players. Obviously, all 4 of these guys are new, but let's focus on 2 players in particular. This was the first appearance, obviously, of Ellie, very much the backbone, a pinnacle, key player throughout the Blackshaw saga. What's it like running a game for Ellie, and what was it like running this game for Ellie?
I should say, first of all, like my initial concept, or like one of the initial things that I thought about the show that ended up not being the case, was that Ellie and Vicky would be core cast, and that they would always be in it, and that the other 2 players would be the ones that rotate. So in the end, we ended up with a bigger ensemble, and to kind of be fair to everybody and give everybody a fair shake, we ended up rotating everybody all the time. But the initial idea, when it was kind of a smaller thing, when it was much more limited to only people who are members of Blackshaw Theatre Company, this was envisioned as a Blackshaw Theatre Company podcast.
A collaboration.
Yeah, the idea was that we would have the kind of 2 core cast members and the regular GM, and that the rest of the cast would be what rotated. Because I had it in my head that for the audience, it's better to have sort of a number of familiar voices and sort of not so many new voices to get to know every season.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, maybe I'd be interested to hear from anybody in the audience whether they would have preferred that to what we ended up with.
Yeah, please tweet your comments on this comment. What are we at? Merely Roleplayers on Twitter.
At Merely Roleplay on Twitter, because of character limits.
So this was the first of many appearances from Ellie. What I've noticed from going back and listening to all the old seasons is how much Ellie sort of grows in confidence as the seasons progress. As you say, Ellie is a theatre-y type. She's an excellent improviser, and obviously a very theatrical person. She's the real-life director of Blackshaw Theatre Company. I noticed a bit of hesitation initially in her voice in playing a game, rather than just improvising a scene. And I think that is the same for quite a few people that don't play games who are theatre-y. They say, well, I just want to go ahead and chat and invent things in my brain. Well, I've got this bit of paper in front of me. What am I doing? How do I do this right? How do I win this game?
Yeah, Ellie has said on the record in many Backstage episodes, so I don't feel bad putting words in her mouth, that in those early seasons, especially Ariadne, she had it in her head that it was almost like a puzzle box kind of game, that like I had come up with a story that they needed to tell, and for some perverse reason I wasn't telling them what it was, and they had to puzzle out like the right path through it, almost like a choose your own adventure book.
Almost like a railroading video game as well, right?
Yeah.
You are told that this is what we're supposed to do. So when you're given that ultimate freedom of, hey, in this instance, Ellie, what do you want to do? There's almost that instant reaction of, what am I supposed to do? Tell me, where am I supposed to go?
Yeah, like that there is a correct way that Matt is expecting this to go, and if I don't make it go that way, I will disappoint him. And we won't be friends anymore. that kind of...
Which is not the
that kind of
case, Ellie,
anxiety.
if you're listening. It's not the case at all. Brilliant. And in addition, the other sort of backbone for the Blackshaw saga, Vicky. Another very theatrical person, producer extraordinaire for Blackshaw Theatre, so lots of theatre experience, not a lot of role-playing experience.
Not just theatre experience, but Vicky is one of the most kind of genre-savvy people that I know.
That's true. She knows every trope under the sun.
She knows her tropes. And also, as a role player, is kind of, like the word that comes to mind is forensic. She will dive into details and investigate things and try to puzzle out what the solution, like what the mystery is, but not in the kind of out of character, what does Matt the GM want me to do here, but like, what is this character hiding from me?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I get the impression from her, at least, that that's what she kind of enjoys in a game.
I completely agree. She also is very, very focused on what needs to be done and trying to progress the story, which I think is, as a player, I'm very much like this myself when I play games like D&D. I really appreciate, because it's all well and good everybody having fun and being chaotic and stuff, but ultimately there is an end goal here. So, fun police, that's me. But yeah, no. Again, I could sense perhaps a little bit of nerves in her voice to begin with in this first season, but ultimately totally got on board with it as the seasons progressed.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of nerves in my voice in the first season as well.
100%. So that's Ellie and Vicky. I'll come to the other players later. Don't worry, you won't be missed out. Let's talk about the system then. For those of you who perhaps have not listened to this season in a while, this was the very first system that Matt had designed, as he said, derived from a game originally played on a holiday a few months earlier. Very, very simple, based on Powered by the Apocalypse. You roll 2 dice, you apply a modifier, and if it's a roll of 7 or below, then it's a fail.
6 or below.
6 or below, then it's a failure. If it's between 7 and 9, it's a mixed success. 10 or above, fantastic, well done. You get to do exactly what you want to. Tell us about the stats and tell us about the other parts of the character sheet.
So the stats were mind, body, and soul, and you got a 1 and a 0 and a -1 to allocate to those. Very heavily based from the Stolen Century, which I believe the stats for that one were mind, body, and heart. So I just, this is a spooky game, so instead of heart, we're going to have soul. And I used the kind of the simple world structure, which doesn't have kind of basic moves in the same way as a lot of slightly more built out systems like Monster of the Week do. It just has the one kind of basic move, take action. And it's like, when you do something that's difficult or where the outcome can potentially be interesting, pick the stat that seems the most appropriate. Whereas sort of some of the more built out systems will have moves that are more defined and say, when you do this specific thing, roll this specific stat. But for these ones, it's just like, what? Oh, you're doing something a bit magical and a bit spooky, so this will be a soul one. Or you're trying to pick up a big ladder, so this will be a body roll.
Well, what it means, there's 2 big benefits to that sort of game. The first one is it welcomes in newer players, and all of you, first episode of a podcast, it sort of settles nerves that you've got a simplistic system to play with. But secondly, it means that the eye line of the players is never really on the character sheet in front of them. They're looking to you. First port of call is, Matt, what can I do? Where do I go? Like I say, I want to climb that ladder. I want to go and investigate that noise. They're not looking at a sheet saying, Matt, I want to roll soul because I'm really, really good at soul. What can I do? It means it adds to the narrative-focused and driven gameplay that you strive to create.
And it's always fun when people are first getting used to systems, when they go, okay, this is what I want to do. They describe the action, and you tell them to roll their worst stat, and they go, damn it!
Why can't I roll animal handling? I'm really good at animal handling!
But then that then ends up informing, characterful action. If they roll a very bad roll because they have -1 on body, then they are in character maybe less likely to do physical things later in the game, and that is characterful and leads to differentiation between the characters. They're all approaching things in different ways because they're learning as they go what they're more likely to succeed at.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the setting for Ariadne. The idea of putting it within a theatre and framing it within the idea of let's do a theatrical get-in, I personally think is very, very good. It's genius because you're settling the nerves of these 4 first-time podcast players and putting them in a situation that is completely familiar to them, so that immediately they're given the choice of what to do within a scenario they recognise. Too often, when you play games, you can be presented with a fantastical landscape or setting and told, right, you wizard, you futuristic battle robot paladin, what do you want to do? And you're just like, I have no idea what's going on.
You end up with lots of questions along the line of, would I know anything about this?
Yeah.
Which ends up with just a lot of the GM talking.
Yeah, 100%. You want to lead with your players rather than it being, a half-hour introduction from the GM. You want them to get in straight away. And so, therefore, you can lead with, you're doing a get-in, what do you do?
We should say as well, it's not just a familiar setting, but that for the whole of the Blackshore saga, we had this conceit that we're all playing ourselves.
Of course.
So we weren't asking the players to get into a character. It was more, I'll describe a situation, you tell me what you, the player, would do in this situation.
With the concept of playing versions of oneself, do you think that was a bit of a unique selling point for the podcast? Was that something that you wanted to hammer home when you started recording?
It definitely wasn't something that I'd seen in an existing podcast. So yeah, a way of differentiating it. I was trying not to think too much about marketing at that point, and still am not really. Like, it's still kind of a hobbyist thing more than something that we're trying to really make it big with. But I was mainly thinking about it as an access thing, and like you say, working with people who weren't necessarily veteran role-playing game players to take away that extra thing to concentrate on and just say, okay, you don't need to remember 4 new names, your own and your 3 colleagues. You don't need to remember what they look like and be imagining that. You can be imagining the situation, but you can just imagine yourself, and you don't have to filter your actions through an extra layer of, okay, I need to understand this character and their motivation and then think about what they would do. I can just think about what I would do.
So we've discussed the system that you've created. How did it feel running the system with this group of players and within this setting?
So one of the things I think is interesting to revisit, or that I have found it interesting to revisit looking back at earlier seasons, is my understanding of Powered by the Apocalypse and the kind of the philosophy behind it and how it should be GM'd. Because I think if you listen through maybe the sort of first 3 or 4 series, I think it's when we get to Amnesty is when you can see that it really clicks. And at this point, I don't think I quite understood exactly what I had permission to do in response to roles, or not in response to roles as well. So I think one of the reasons that this season gets started so slowly, and the players have taken a lot of this upon themselves and blame themselves for concentrating on the mundane aspects of the theatrical get-in and not on the supernatural stuff. But also, I didn't have a good idea in my head of when it was appropriate or when I was kind of permitted to just make a thing happen. So I was waiting for somebody to do something that required a roll and for them to roll badly before something weird and supernatural would happen. Whereas, and part of this is because I hadn't actually read a published Powered by the Apocalypse game at this point. So I was working almost off like the shadows on the cave wall rather than on the form of the thing itself. I was working off Simple World, which doesn't have GM tips really, and I was working off hearing Griffin McElroy GM it on the Adventure Zone, and he had a very specific kind of set of targets he was aiming for in that season. So when you get to read Monster of the Week or OG Apocalypse World, it becomes clear that everything the GM says should be a move. And there is a list of GM moves that help you sort of create fiction in the genre-appropriate way. And it's the idea that just any time you are describing the world, you can be doing something consequential. You don't just have to be telling people this is what you see in the room. If somebody goes into somewhere or is sort of pottering about on the stage, the GM is allowed to be like, and something weird and spooky happens, what do you do? You don't have to wait for a roll for it. So I think that's another reason that it is kind of a slow starter. I believe there aren't any dice rolls in episode 1 in Act 1 of Ariadne.
I think it's all establishing plot and doing the get-in.
It's all role-playing, and we don't get to any dice until Act 2.
Mm.
And it's partly that I'm kind of like sitting there timidly waiting for people to do big action, and nobody wants to take big action.
No.
And I didn't understand at the time that I could just make a thing happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And get them to respond to it.
Mm. Ultimately, you're in charge. You're directing this piece of theatre, right? This podcast episode, this game, this piece of theatre. And so at any point you can say, you know what, it's sort of they're going in either the wrong direction or the pace is slowing down. Do you know what? A light is going to randomly fall out of the rig and fall on you. What do you do? Because that's the point. It's all about making it engaging. It's about engaging it for the audience, for the players, for yourself. You want to see what people do.
I should look back at my either my journals or my story graph or something and work out at what point I actually read Apocalypse World, the original Powered by the Apocalypse system that all of these other ones have branched off from.
And see if there's a change in how you run the games.
Yeah, because to my mind, of all the ones that I've read, that's still the one that explains how to run the game the best.
Mm-hmm.
It is the best and most... It is when it really clicked for me how to run a Powered by the Apocalypse game well, and how the GM role is supposed to work, and how it's very different from a Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master. Mm. But I don't think I read it for for many, many, many seasons. I'm pretty sure I read Impulse Drive first. I might have read bits of Masks before then. It took me a long time to actually get my hands on a copy of Apocalypse World and read the original and go, oh, this is how it works.
Now it makes
sense.
You
can see me getting there.
Yeah.
Through, like I say, up to Amnesty when I start taking bigger swings. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see at what point I actually read those guidelines and when it really clicked.
I mean, by the time we roll around to the final seasons, I'm thinking Prospero Viola and Deja Vu in particular, you are just throwing everything at us. It just comes from nowhere, and it's wonderful because we have a chance to react and to deal with those big, big moments.
Yeah, I mean, that is why players get bogged down doing things like, I'm just doing the minutiae of a day-to-day theatre day job, is because I'm not putting stuff there for them to react to. Mm. Or like the only things I'm giving them to react to are people like the theatre manager doing the mundanities of that job. Mm. And so that's all they have to react to. So yeah, it's as much on me as on the players for Ariadne.
100%.
Although I don't think, like, when you actually listen back, we all have it in our heads that Ariadne is an incredibly slow burn. Mm. And I think when you actually listen to it, if you're listening through, kind of binging through all at once, I don't think it is that slow.
No, so for my research listeners, I've been going back and listening to all the old seasons, and honestly, it doesn't feel like it drags. It doesn't feel like it is a slow burner. Maybe it's a slow burner in terms of getting the action started, but once you're there, then it's excellently paced. And once you're dealing with people falling down trapdoors and dealing with people barricading themselves in offices and ghostly audiences appearing, then it really, really sparks into action. So maybe a slow burner in terms of the start of the first episode of the season, but the whole season isn't a slow burner. So don't be so hard on yourself, man. It's fabulous. Let's go to the first question that we've got through, sent in by a player from Season 3, which we will hear from soon. Helen. Helen's question very simply was, how nervous were you?
Very.
There you go, Helen, you've got your answer. Very nervous.
Yeah, and I think you can hear, like, each first was something to be nervous about. So, like, once the mic was running and I first opened my mouth to introduce and set the scene, nervous about that. And then later down the line, first time to speak in character as a supporting character, a new thing to be nervous about. First time somebody needs to make a roll and I need to remember the mechanics, that's another thing to be nervous about. So it wasn't like starting nerves and then getting to your stride. It was like, oh, there's this other thing coming up that is also, like, everything was a first. So everything was something to be like, well, I don't know if this is going to work even, or if I'm going to be able to do it. Absolutely.
Listen, you've got to make those big decisions early on. You don't know if they're going to come off, but you've got to be brave enough to make those decisions, right? And ultimately it paid off. You guys had such a hard job, performing for a podcast as well as participating in a new TTRPG. I don't mean to be gushy, but you all did a really, really good job. And the season was great fun. Talking about nerves and talking about sort of being in a very new scenario, let's move on to our first recorded question
Hello, Matt. This is Ellie of several series from Mini Role Players. I got so bogged down in the minutiae of my role in Ariadne, I'd never played role-playing games before, and so I was focused on the literal day-to-day of running a real theatre get-in rather than heading straight into the role-playing action. I just did not understand that to keep things moving, I actually needed to do something, anything, and that there were no wrong answers. How did that feel as GM? I imagine it was painful?
Not so much painful as something that I hadn't anticipated. And so I remember a kind of frozen deer in the headlights kind of reaction of like, oh, this is what everybody's doing. I don't know what to do about this. I think in now, if a similar situation wouldn't happen because everybody knows what they're doing now, if a similar situation arose today, I would know how to prompt it to say the concept we had that I had introduced to the cast before we started rolling the mic was you're a theatre company, but that's really just a cover, and you're actually Ghostbusters, and you go into all of these haunted places and you exorcise or address ghostly paranormal manifestations and stuff like that. And so everybody picked up the memo of you are a theatre company, because that was the familiar thing, exactly like we've just talked about. That was the familiar thing to seize upon, to smooth in and get things moving. And nobody began to engage with the other half of the scenario, which was you are secretly Ghostbusters. So if this happened now, I would be prompting things like, so in these situations, what is your usual procedure? Like, how do you normally assess a space for manifestations? What is your normal first port of call? Like, kind of bringing in elements of that routine, like creating the new routine. And then if we were still stuck, you've always got the option of stepping back completely from the table, completely out of character, and going, guys, do you remember that we all agreed that this is a story about ghost busting? Do you want to do some ghost busting now? But like the kind of the in-character prompts come first, and are just a slightly friendlier way of me saying, this is the sort of action that we all agreed we wanted to see. Can we get to it? Like, this is the time to get to it now.
Marvellous. Let's move on to the next topic. I wonder if you can guess what I'm going to talk about. It's an NPC that drinks a certain salty, beefy beverage. What do you think I'm going to talk to you about now?
I think we might be moving on to the subject of Errol.
Errol! Where did this character come from, Matt? What prompted this? Have you got it written down in your book in front of you here? Have you got a note? I want to introduce a slightly odd, slightly gormless character who drinks Bovril, or did it just come from your imagination in the spur of the moment?
So in fact, the very first double-page spread of this notebook that I planned the early seasons in, before we get to the second spread is titled Ghost Story and has notes on this will be about the Ariadne Theatre, and this will be what the nature of the haunting is. Mm-hmm. But before we even get to the concept of the season, we have a spread titled The Observer.
The Observer.
And Errol came from a bit of Dylan Moran stand-up that I remember from a long time ago, where he talks about the estuary English accent.
Oh, okay. Is that the... do you want another drink then? Is it that bit?
It's I believe so he's talking about the key phrases that you use to get yourself into an accent.
Okay, yeah.
And also just generally talking about estuary English, and he describes it as boneless. And
Errol is definitely quite floppy. I think he's eel-like.
I believe the phrase that he uses to demonstrate estuary English is, no, I don't want that one. I want one of these ones. It's a little bit milder.
God. Errol's in the room, ladies and gentlemen. He's joining us.
So Errol's a little bit less nasal than that. But I was like, well, that's an accent that I can do. Mm-hmm. Let's use that for this character.
I tell you what, it's amazing. Listening back to the very first season, just quite how quickly the cast were repulsed, or at least repelled by him. You said like one phrase, and I could hear the shivers down the spines of all the players.
I had no idea that I was setting myself up to quite such a hostile reaction to Bovril. I didn't know that Strat had that particular aversion.
I've never met a person like Bovril.
No,
Are
me
you
neither.
supposed
Me
to drink
neither.
it when you're ill? No,
No,
just
it's
a
for like
warm drink.
fortifying,
You're
right?
meant to drink it when you literally have nothing else to possibly drink.
The only time I've ever had Bovril is when we used to do swimming galas, and you would sit on the side of the pool and get really cold, and they would give you a hot Ribena or a hot Bovril.
Why
to
did you
make
choose the
not cold.
Bovril?
I would choose only if they ran out of hot Ribena.
No, not even then.
No, but you're
I would
so
literally
cold.
drink the chlorine in the pool.
No, but that doesn't warm you up when you're like actually turning blue.
I genuinely didn't realise you had such strong feelings
has very
against
strong-
Bovril.
Nor did I,
It's
Alex.
terrible. It is terrible. I mean, you might as well just drink a bit of Bisto gravy.
I mean, just to go on record, Bovril is disgusting. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, I've never had it, but that idea of drinking beef stock is absolutely revolting. And I will happily go on record saying that. Did you think that he was going to feature quite so heavily in Blackshore lore?
Yes, the whole point of him was that he would be the thing that turns up in every season.
I see.
And hints that these disconnected standalone stories might not be as disconnected and standalone as they seem.
So there was a big grandiose plan for him from day one.
Yeah, I don't think I knew from day one exactly what he was doing, but I knew that I wanted to hint that the stories were connected, and a consistent character was a way of doing that.
Sure.
And to make him work for that purpose, he needed to be distinctive and memorable.
Blimey, I mean, he was definitely memorable. See, I can't speak for everybody else in the cast, but I just assumed that you were just putting him in to troll us, that you were just putting him in because it'd be a giggle, and every time somebody went, oh, I'm going to go and speak to this NPC, and you went, oh, they've got badges, they look a little bit eely, they look a bit boneless, and everyone goes, oh, Jesus, it's him, isn't it? He's back. I just assumed that he was just a joke.
No, and in fact, the Bovril thing was I wanted to hint whenever he appeared. I wanted there to be strong hints that he's there's something a bit wrong and he's not from here. He doesn't really get how stuff works. So he knows that people drink hot drinks and they're sometimes black, and he's found some Bovril, so he's going to make Bovrils.
Yeah, there's a slight element of a Mr. Bean here,
Yeah,
right? The concept of Mr. Bean, the character, was that he is an alien and he's dressed up like a very sort of normal, boring grey man.
Is that the concept behind Mr. Bean?
Supposedly, or it's a fan theory, or it's something. And I don't know if you know this, but at the end of Mr. Bean, or at the beginning, I can't remember in the original TV show, he zooms down. There's a spotlight on an empty stage, and he just appears. So the idea is that he's been beamed down from a UFO. If you have any other Mr. Bean theories, please do tweet at Merely Roleplay.
And inside you find a young chap apparently having already just boiled the kettle and doing some bustling about.
Oh.
He is probably seems a little younger than Phoebe, maybe mid-20s rather than late. He has on a faded denim jacket covered in patches, and it's sort of a mixture of activism organisation patches, he's got a rainbow and a pride thing and that kind of stuff, and what you'd call stealth geek patches, so a Wayland Yutani patch, and an Institute of Planar Research and Exploration patch and stuff like that is referencing geek stuff, but it doesn't just say the name of the thing, it's an organisation from the thing. He's got one side of his head is shaved, and he's got the rest of his hair just looks less well maintained and is just kind of in a big messy sweep over to the other side. And he's just pouring a load of mugs full of boiling water at this point. And he hasn't noticed that you've come in.
Okay. Oh, sorry, mate. I'm Alex. I'm with Blackshore. We've just come in to do the new show that's going up. It's going up tomorrow.
Oh yeah. I knew you were coming. Yeah, I'm Errol.
Oh hi, Errol. So what do you do here?
Oh, I just do the odd bit and bob. Yeah, so
right.
I'm just doing a round. Do you wanna a cuppa?
Absolutely. That'd be lovely.
I've done 4, and there's 4 mugs of steaming black
liquid. Okay. Let's hope some of them are coffee and at least one of them is tea.
So, Matt, to finish off our discussion of Ariadne Season 1, I'm going to have to go full Paxman on you now. I need to ask you a very serious question, and I will only accept a yes or a no answer here, okay? Are you ready for the big question?
Just a yes or a no?
you can begin with that, and then I will look forward to hearing your explanation, because you're probably going to upset one side of the Merely Role Players universe. Okay.
What is this?
Hang on, wait. So you met a bloke who was making a round of drinks, and
Yeah.
you assumed that he was making drinks for us.
I didn't assume he was making drinks for us. He said, "Here's some drinks. Would you like them?"
Yeah, but I'm saying he was obviously making drinks for someone,
someone
and what you
else.
did was walk into that room
And
and
took his
take the
drinks.
drinks that he was
did
making
offer them.
specifically for somebody else.
He didn't really offer them. What did he
He
offer
did.
them?
He did offer them. Otherwise, I would
Who
have
were
taken
the
them.
who were the other people that he was making the drinks for
I don't
at this
know.
point?
He didn't know how many of us there were, or that I didn't want a hot drink.
How many drinks was he making?
I just saw like full cups.
So
I
him.
assumed it was him, and then the three of us.
But
Who
how
he
can
had not met and didn't know we were going to
No.
want tea or
Well,
coffee.
It's so confusing.
I don't-
But then 4 doesn't make sense because that would have been him, B, and Tess. There's only 3 of them.
Here's the question. Did Alex steal the Bovril from Errol? Did he steal it?
No, Alex didn't steal the Bovril.
Vindication for Alexander Pankhurst there. He's not a thief, not guilty, Your Honour.
Didn't steal the Bovril. I'm pretty sure he
It
did
does
offer
sound
it.
like it got offered. It does sound like
Yeah.
it got offered.
Let me just nick someone's Bovril. That's awful.
Sorry.
Although interesting that he assumed that we would want Bovril.
So before we move on and before we move away from the first season, Ariadne, we got a little bonus segment, a bit of light-hearted fun, because we like light-hearted fun here at Merely Role Players, don't we, Matt?
Yes, we do.
He says,
We're
looking
all-
slightly uncomfortable.
We're all about having fun.
We're all about having fun. Matt, I am aware that you don't get to play many of our games. Your sole appearance is in Parallax, one of them, Converging, Emerging,
I believe it's inverted.
Inverted, Matt the Hound, of course. But we thought we'd use this as an opportunity for you to get to create a character sheet for yourself for the season. So at the end of every season, we're going to be going through and we're just going to be working out exactly who you are and condensing your very complicated personality into a few lines on a slip of paper. It would be remiss of me not to name this segment Matt's Stats. So, Matt, what have we decided to call Season 1 in your honour?
It says at the top of this slip, Season 1, Ariadne.
Ariadne. Yes, you can see a theme emerging here.
Love a pun.
It's going to get very tricky as the seasons go on and on. So, 3 stats, mind, body and soul. Body is the obvious one, physical, running, climbing trees and whatever else. Tell us a quick difference between mind and soul.
So mind is for intellectual stuff like remembering or coming up with a puzzle solution or analysing some financial records or that kind of thing, whereas
Perfect.
soul is for spooky stuff.
Spooky, ghostly things.
Doing magic and communing with spirits and all of those kinds of things.
Fabulous. Where do you think, don't write anything in yet, but where do you think your stats would be? So just a reminder to the audience, you get 3 stats for Ariadne. You get a +1, a 0 and a -1. Where would you assign your stats?
I'm playing myself. I think my instinct would probably be to go mind 1, soul 0 and body -1.
Interesting. Well, as you very well know, here at Merely Role Players, we don't get to decide our own stats. It's the people around the table that get to decide your stats for you, and indeed everything else that's on your sheet. So I've enlisted Season 1 player, Blackshaw Theatre Director Ellie, to help you fill out your sheet. So here we are. So I asked Ellie, what would Matt's stats be? So you said mind 1, body -1,
Yep.
soul 0. She has given you mind 1, body -1 and soul 0.
Hey!
Congratulations. And she said,
That is
sorry,
a strong start.
that's a hell of a strong start. We should start making some notes on this to see quite how well you do, see if you can get 100% by the end. So tick, tick, tick for you. Yes, we've turned it into competition. Ellie said, Matt is a cerebral man with just the right amount of soul. I don't really know what that means, but that seems to be a nice comment.
Just the right amount of soul. 0.
0 soul, less than averagely soulful. She's written, he doesn't believe, but he loves to think about the spooky and the supernatural. And his bod, and I believe she means bod, I don't think that's a typo, and his bod, whilst perfect, is not suited to fighting. And I always score bodies on their fighting potential. Fight Club pick in there.
I remember a challenge of the early seasons was coming up with names for stats that wouldn't lead to like insulting feelings.
It always feels slightly strange when you first have to like judge other people, and you're like, oh no, Josh, he's stupid. He's got a -1 for mind. His body's not great either. So can we have 2 -1s? It always feels a little bit strange, but we take it.
Yeah, I think I remember there was a discussion of like, oh, Vicky has no soul. I seem to remember being a thing that came up.
Yes, indeed. You've also got a special, you've got a role at the Blackshaw Theatre Get-In. Your role in this, Ellie has given you a lighting designer / technician.
Yep.
You were a lampy in a former life, of course.
Been, yeah.
Now, bear in mind that several times throughout Ariadne, lighting equipment started falling from the ceiling, so you obviously didn't do a great job there. And finally, I asked her what signature spooky move would Matt have, and she's given you the role of medium, the host of a séance. And she's written, it's basically the spooky version of a GM, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? How would you have got on with those abilities if you were in the original Ariadne?
I would definitely have been trying to communicate with the entity rather than necessarily fight it in the first instance. And with my 0 soul, probably would have rolled badly and got taken over.
Yay! Ghostly Matt. I mean, it's really, really fortunate that you weren't in the original Ariadne with that ability, because 10 minutes in you would have said, hey, I'm going to hold a seance. Good, I've convinced them to go. Let's do the get-in. And it would have been a real slow burner of an episode. Fabulous. Matt stats for Season 1 Ariadne.
This has been Replay, a Backstage episode from Merely Roleplayers. It was created, researched and hosted by Josh Yard, and the editing, music and production were by me, Matt Boothman. If you have a question about any Merely Roleplayers production from Parallax onwards, tweet it at Merely Roleplay on Twitter, or email it to merelyroleplayers@gmail.com, and it could be featured in an upcoming replay episode. Merely Roleplayers is a Foggy Outline production in association with Blackshaw Theatre Company. Until next time, if drama be the food of life, play on!